Right now, the planet is experiencing the largest energy crisis in the last 50 years. Due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the reduction of production by Middle Eastern countries, the world economy is experiencing the most severe energy crisis since the 1970s. Just a week after Donald Trump started a war against Iran, but suddenly, American media claim that the US will not suffer this time because after the Arab countries imposed an oil embargo in 1973 against those who supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War, unlike the situation 50 years ago, the US is now the largest oil producer. But for many rapidly developing Asian countries, there is simply nowhere to find a replacement for Middle Eastern oil. In this episode, we'll discuss with you how the war against Iran has already affected the energy market and what to expect next. Spoiler, nothing good. My name is Alex Hipeci, and this is my personal project Conspiracy Theories, where together we debunk conspiracy theories and try to explain these complex geopolitical processes in the simplest terms possible. So if you like this format, please support it with a like and your comment under this episode. So, experts are confident that if Middle Eastern oil exports from the region do not resume by Friday, the average daily production in the Middle East could drop by more than 4 million barrels. This is according to JP Morgan Chase. If Iran is able to block the Strait of Hormuz until the end of March, the average daily production will decrease by another 9 million barrels, which is almost 10% of the world's supply. That means the world will lose 10% of all the oil it consumes every day. And I started analyzing what's happening and, out of habit, decided to look into history. Well, has there ever been such a precedent in history so we can understand how to react to it? Because as a rule, many events have already happened in history and more or less you can understand what will happen next. And I was shocked. Throughout the entire written history of the Strait of Hormuz, it has never been closed. Not once. Yes, there were skirmishes, attacks, problems, but the strait has never been completely closed. This is the worst scenario one could possibly imagine. Iraq was the first to start cutting production due to a lack of oil storage capacity. And as of today, it is no longer producing more than 2/3 of its usual 4 million barrels per day. Once again, 2/3 are no longer being produced. Kuwait followed Iraq, then the United Arab Emirates, and on Monday, Saudi Arabia also began to cut oil production. It produces about 10 million barrels per day, of which it exports 7 million, so you understand how this will affect the market. At first, participants in the oil market reacted cautiously to the hostilities in Iran, with prices jumping. Prices stayed in the range of $80 to $85 per barrel almost until the end of last week, based on the assumption that the US and Israel would quickly deprive Iran of the ability to launch retaliatory strikes, including against countries in the region. But then it quickly became clear that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz could last so long that it would trigger a full-scale global crisis. After trading began on Monday, the price of Brent and American WTI jumped almost to 102, reaching $120 per barrel, although it then dropped closer to $100. And as of today, at this moment, it's around 89, give or take. Well, let's turn to history once again here. It was the Middle East that became the source of the largest oil shock in history, but today's events are nothing compared to those that took place in the 1970s. After the embargo was imposed in 1973, global prices quadrupled in just 3 months. And then, at the end of that decade, in 1979, when the events in Iran happened, the Islamic Revolution, and then Iran started a war with Iraq, Iranian oil production collapsed and prices doubled again. So there really was a collapse then, and it was at that time that the energy shock triggered a recession in the United States and European countries, and contributed to a sharp acceleration of inflation in the Western world, which was already high in the early 1970s. But now, let me reassure you a bit. People are talking about the risks of stagflation. Not inflation, stagflation specifically. They're different concepts. And here I'll give you a quote from Reuters on this matter. If the US is less dependent on the global market situation today, the same cannot be said for many countries in Asia and Europe. Asia, the world's largest importer of oil, buys 60% of its oil and petrochemical feedstock from the Middle East, and Japan, for example, depends on it for 95%, after it stopped purchasing from Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. Replacing these supplies with oil from other sources is difficult or even impossible. For example, crude oil from West Africa and the Americas takes a month and a half to 2 months to reach China, so orders need to be placed 3 months in advance. Meanwhile, delivery from the Middle East takes about 25 days. And it's also important to remember that crude oil from different regions has different compositions. Asian oil refineries are primarily set up for Middle Eastern crude oil. Some countries can only replace small volumes. Simply put, replacing even a small portion of the roughly 16 million barrels of Middle Eastern oil sent to Asia every day with supplies from Atlantic Basin countries is simply not possible at all. To understand this, refineries would need to be reconfigured to handle new grades of crude oil. By the way, China is relatively safe today because its reserves are estimated at the very least at 1.2 billion barrels. This is enough to cover about 200 days of imports. That means China can easily sit back for more than half a year and not worry at all. But is the situation really hopeless? Of course not. There are ways to partially overcome the blockade of the Persian Gulf. And now there are already signs that they are slowly coming out of the crisis, even though the Strait of Hormuz may still remain closed. After the 1970s, Saudi Arabia built an oil pipeline from its eastern coast on the Persian Gulf to the western coast on the Red Sea, exactly for a situation like today. That is, they understood that the situation could get worse. Iran has been unreliable since that revolution, so it's better to protect themselves and not rely on only one route for oil delivery. Of course, it's not possible to transport the entire volume of Saudi exports through this pipeline, but it can noticeably ease the shortage. That is, the pipeline has a capacity of 5 million barrels per day. The capacity is 5 million and Saudi Arabia exports 7 million, so there are losses, but they're not that critical. And here is the first result. On Sunday, the state company Saudi Aramco was loading 3 supertankers. A supertanker is one that can carry more than 2 million barrels each. So, it was loading these 3 supertankers at terminals on the Red Sea. This clearly indicates that part of the oil is already being transported through the pipeline. The United Arab Emirates also has a pipeline with a capacity of 1.5 million barrels per day, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz to the Gulf of Oman, from where there is an unobstructed route to the open sea. The Abu Dhabi state company ADNOC has also started loading supertankers there. In short, the Emirates and Saudi Arabia learned their lessons after the 1970s and built pipelines. Before the war, about 50 ships passed through the Hormuz Strait every day in each direction, about 2/3 of which were tankers carrying crude oil, petroleum products, or liquefied gas. Now, only a few such ships pass through. In addition, not only oil is delivered through the strait, but also many other raw materials, from fertilizers for the countries of the region to aluminum for other markets. Lastly, I'll add one important thought. Iran's attacks on the energy facilities of neighboring Arab countries and on shipping look like a desperate attempt to make the war so painful for the US economy and its allies that Trump would make concessions. In exactly the same way, in 2022, Russia acted by cutting gas supplies in an attempt to force European countries to stop supporting Ukraine. Within 6 months of the full-scale war against Ukraine, Russia artificially created a gas shortage in Europe in order to use blackmail to force Europe to stop supporting Ukraine. The essence of all dictatorial regimes is the same. While civilized countries, when starting a war, strike at the regime, strike at the authorities, strike at military targets. Dictators like Vladimir Putin or now Mojtaba Khamenei strike at ordinary people, in order to hurt as many people as possible, so that these people would then pressure their authorities to make concessions. And all this is for the survival of the regime itself. They absolutely do not care about people. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel financially. You can support us with your donation or subscription using the links and details in the description of this video, or by using the QR code on your screen. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.